welcome to We Have Ways of Making You Talk El Alamein Week with me, Al Murray and James Holland. And we're starting with a poem, or we're framing these episodes with verse, aren't we, Jim?
We are, and I think that's a nice departure and one that marks out the Alamein Week. It's just a little bit special.
Yeah, and I dug this up. It's called War in the Desert by Signalman G. Harker. I found a page with veterans' poems and impressions on it. A universe of space, infinite sands, unbroken line to mark off cloudless blue, a shimmering heat that plucks the very life of withered thorns which strive and stretch out shoots, groping in vain to take a hold on life. The desert, mighty, void of hope, immense, disturbed from tortured sleep by sounds of war, her barren bosom throbs with life once more. Across her brow come men and guns to rest, from foeman's grasp another sterile stretch. And so the game is played on age-old sands, shades of the Caesars of a bygone day. Their might decayed, great triumphs turned to dust. Soon, as with them, shall our deeds grow obscure, our victories unimportant, efforts vain, defaced by time. Once more the desert reigns, our warfare but a phase, long, long forgot.
I think that's rather nice.
That's rather good, that. But we are here to make sure that it is not long forgot, aren't we, James? So
and it's funny, you stand there, you're standing on the Mitraille Ridge, and it's all pretty empty, and you're looking down, and it is incredibly atmospheric, because it's so quiet, because you've largely got the whole place to yourself. Occasionally you see Bedouins, and occasionally you see kind of Egyptian army stuff kind of in the far, far distance. But basically you've got the whole place to yourself. And it is quite an emotional experience, that has to be said. There's no getting away from it.
Yeah. So where we got to was the flap.
Yes, and Rommel launching his attack on the 1st of July.
Yeah. At El Alamein. So this is
El Alamein.
The first Battle of El Alamein begins, and this is 10 days after the fall of Tobruk. So things are happening very, very quickly. They're happening in a real tumble. 8th Army are really in trouble. I think it's fair to say. The Desert Air Force, on the other hand, is not. And while what you can do is look at this and look at the sort of pell-mell panic, the Germans have actually got problems of their own, which they're storing up for themselves. Yeah. So let's talk about those, Jim.
Well, the problems they got for themselves is that already they've overreached themselves. They've already reached their culmination point.
Yes.
And the culmination point for those, it always crops up when you talk about the Eastern Front. But for those who've forgotten it or aren't aware of it, the culmination point is the point at which you are so far from your base supplies, your lines of communication, your lines of supply are so stretched, are so overreached that you can no longer do what you want to do in the way you want to do it.
Yeah.
And at this point, they're so hammered. They've been so hammered all the way. It's basically they're in hot pursuit of 8th Army, and all the way they've been harried by the Desert Air Force and by the RAF at night. Round the clock bombing. It's just been it's like someone just pecking at you the whole time. And so by this point they've just got Rommel's got 55 Panzers left in the Deutsche Afrika Corps, the Afrika Corps, and 30 Italian tanks. And the 90th Light Division, which is in the spearhead, has just got 1,000 motorized troops left. They've got about 300 guns between them, which includes only 29 88 millimeters.
Wow.
And the railway line, which is such an important artery to the whole thing, is completely out of action because all the locomotives have been destroyed. Yeah. So they're just not operating. So they cannot operate. So and don't forget, these guys have been in action since the 26th of May.
Yeah, yeah.
So they're and the Germans take a dim view of people kind of having time off.
Yeah,
that's considered a bit infra-dig. Come on, keep going. And it's very much Rommel's way that you always just charge on hell metal.
And that's what worked in France in 1940, after all, is that thing of just put your foot to the floor, push. If the other side are going to oblige you by folding, then you've got to make the most of it. Because I was just going to say, what's his other option, actually? Hold up, stop essentially at Tobruk, put in his own Gazala line in reverse. I mean, what actually?
Yeah. I think that is his option at that point. Once they've got away, then you pull back to, I don't know, Mercer Matrill or something. The Eighth Army is not going anywhere.
No,
it's literally not going anywhere. So what you do is you hold fire, you bring the whole thing to a halt. You go, okay, this ship has sailed.
You go with that went well, don't you? You go.
You went, well, I've just absolutely destroyed the Eighth Army. We've absolutely, but we need to build up our own strength.
Yeah.
And you get on the blower and you go, send me some Tigers, send me some, whatever you can send me. I need some bigger guns, bigger tanks, and you give yourself everyone a break and a breather.
Yeah.
Much as you did in, the early part of 1942, but everyone's so pumped for this. Mussolini's come over with his white horse. Everyone's the dreams of getting beyond the Suez Canal into the oil fields of them. It's like this. It's like El Dorado. This, because the Germans so badly need oil. This tantalizing glimpse. We're so close. If we can just do this little extra yard.
I mean, in a way.
And so of course he attacks at Alamein because. He's got them beat, and there's just one last push. It's all that kind of mentality. I mean, but the difference is, of course, is that in France, you've got lots of infrastructure around you, and you've got roads and railways, and you've got everything behind you in 1940.
Yes, you've got.
Whereas here you haven't.
You've got options. Whereas the whole point of the British defence here is to, and it's the luck of the geography, is to reduce the German options to somewhere much more defensible, somewhere where you can't flank, somewhere where there is only one road and there is only one railway line, which after all makes the Desert Air Force's job a whole lot easier. You've not got to go find the road that the Germans are likely to be on, or the railway line that they're likely to be exploiting. I mean, it is interesting, isn't it? I mean, it's like a mirage of an oasis in a way. The oil, isn't it? It's like it's a desert mirage.
Completely.
You think one last heave and we'll get to the oil, and Yet this is
one last climb over the sand dune, and there will be my fort with palm trees and water.
Exactly, one final ridge. And but the thing is, though, this isn't to say that the panic the panic in Cairo and Alexandria is very real, and there is a genuine feeling that the Germans could come any minute. I mean, in a way, it's reminiscent of London in 1940, isn't it? When there is some panic on,
at the end of May.
Yeah, when you read those diaries like Duff Cooper's diary was going, oh crap, we are.
Yes, and Harold Nicholson saying, I'm preparing the cyanide pill.
Exactly, and all that. It's got that about it again, hasn't it?
It really has, yeah.
Which is interesting because actually the thing you always say about the late summer late May 1940 is actually if you suck your teeth and you're sober about the whole thing, it isn't a perilous situation. It's rotten. It's not what you want. It's not what you wanted, but it's certainly not. It's miles from being irretrievable. And the reason, of course, for that is the Royal Navy and Fighter Command. And you could argue that that's the same thing. It's history repeating or echoing hard that the Army can't get its act together, but fortunately the Air Force has and the Navy has, and that's why this isn't an end game situation for the British in North Africa, right?
Yeah, I think there's two things going on here. I think the first thing is that I think panic is incredibly contagious.
Yes.
So the panic grips Cairo and Alexandria, and it just spreads like a wildfire. And this is all Ash Wednesday is the 1st of July, as it's called.
Yeah.
And that passes pretty quickly, to be fair. It's a kind of fairly brief one. So that's one thing. That's sort of, back at base, back in Cairo, everyone's sort of thinking, gosh, well, it must be serious then if we're burning papers. And then everyone starts thinking, oh, I need to get out of here, and so on. But I think there is a deep malaise within Eighth Army. Ritchie, who has been the Eighth Army commander before he gets sacked by Auchinleck, hasn't gripped these diverse personalities from these different countries. Pienaar, Freiburg, Morshead. I mean, I know Morshead's not up at the Aussies aren't up at the front at that point, but they're all kind of Ramsden, and they're all and Norrie, and they're all kind of
Well, they all come loaded with politics, these guys as well, don't they? So they,
and they're all
it's
all
hard
kind
to
of
grip and sack people who occupy political roles. I mean, again, you could look at if for an analogue, if you look at the political sort of command chaos in Northwest Europe in 1944, there's a similar thing with the British and the Americans chafing against each other politically under one leadership, and there's a sort of mini version of that in Eighth Army, isn't there? It's that
I think there is.
These people don't get on either, do they? They don't get on, and Ritchie hasn't got what it takes to grip them.
No, and then by the time the orc comes in, it's too little, too late.
Yeah,
and everyone's tired and they're depressed and morale is down, and we go back to the 3 M's. That the method is wrong, the motivation isn't there, and morale is dipping. So that makes them dangerous and dangerously weak, and I think that's why. And it's just in Rommel's nature that he's going to just absolutely go for it.
Yeah,
and he does, and he decides to attack in the north of the Alamein line, which obviously is the best defended bit. It's the strongest bit of the line along, basically between the coast and Rewaisat Ridge, which is the first kind of ridge line.
So what you've got then at El Alamein, at the railway, at where the railway station is. I mean, it's
that's sort of 10 miles in. I mean, 10 miles in.
The fact is, there's a handful of buildings, and they. I mean, it's funny that they take on significance. They're the closest thing to a built-up area.
Yeah,
I mean, so you've got the Third South African Brigade behind wires, in fortified positions,
and growing, north. And mines growing up literally with every passing hour.
Yeah. And then you've got down. There's a line that sort of runs diagonally. Southwest out of that position, isn't there? And at the bottom you've got 5th Indian Brigade.
Yes.
And between them 18th Indian and 6th New Zealand and 7th Motor are all stretched out across. And again, it's another one of these lines. Not as obviously not as formally organised as what you had at in the Gazala lines, but they're doing this again, aren't they? They're picketing out a line to try and block between El Alamein and the Katara Depression, basically, aren't they?
Yes. So what they're doing, the Africa Corps and the Italian Brescia are so the Mitterrand. So for the first, you've got the Rewaisat Ridge, which runs roughly east to west.
Yeah,
and is about 10 miles in length.
And it's sort of central.
And it is also about 10 miles from the coast, even though the coast is sloping upwards.
Exactly. So it's sort of it's kind of just north of the centre of the entire battlefield, isn't it? Of the position.
Of the northern bit, yeah.
Yeah, the northern part. Yeah.
Sort of, yeah. And then you've got the Mitterrand Ridge, which runs on a kind of northwest to southeast axis.
Well, yes. I mean, if it's the hands
which
of the
is
clock,
shorter, it's only about 5 miles long.
Yeah, if it's the hands of the clock, the Rewaisat Ridge is 3 o'clock.
Yes.
Is the hand running to 3, and the Mitterrand Ridge is the hand of the clock running to 10.
Really good. Exactly that. So that is absolutely the best way to describe it.
Yeah.
And the Deutsche Afrika Korps with the Brescia Division move in on the southern leeward side of the Mitterrand Ridge to cover them from the north, while the 90th Light, or what remains of them, attack on the other side, straight in at and the whole point is to try and get in around behind the Alamein stop.
Yeah, and that's a sort of 5 mile gap to the Mitterrand Ridge from the coast, isn't it? From the ocean.
It's a bit more than that. It's more like about 8.
Yeah, but they're squeezing themselves into this. The 90th Light, although they're heavily depleted, but they're squeezing themselves into this gap, aren't they, between the Mitterrand Ridge and the coast, and then south of, as you said, south of the Mitterrand Ridge, the Africa Corps are coming in the Brescia are coming in down. So they're then going to encounter what the British have put up. It basically in the middle of
they're trying to do is they're trying to get in deep behind the British lines.
Come around behind them.
The 90th Light will then cut up northwards towards the coast, and the Deutsche Afrika Korps will cut and the Brescia will cut down south in behind the New Zealanders. That's the idea.
And again, defeating the Duke positions in piecemeal. You do it as you can. You can't take them on in full strength. And what's interesting is, as you pointed out earlier, the Germans are very much running out of stuff in the same way, actually, that Eighth Army are. And so this is a sort of punier version of what went on.
Considerably punier.
A month earlier.
Except that you've got the New Zealanders are fresh.
Yeah.
So there are some fresh. Fourth Indian hasn't really been in yet, and they're kind of moving up, and there are, and the Australians are coming, so they're kind of they're on their way. Yep. So if they could just hold them, and actually, what does for the Panzers really for the main strike force is the intensity of the Allied artillery. Yeah. Which is the British artillery, which is impressive and stops them really, and they're getting absolutely nowhere. Then there's a big sandstorm whips up, so that enables the DAC, the Africa Corps, to get going again. But by that point, it's kind of they've just run out of steam. And once they get once the 90th Light, who are on if you remember, they're on the northern part of the Mitterrand Ridge, aiming to cut towards the coastline, they get caught out in the open, and they're absolutely hammered once the dust clears, once the storm clears, and panic sets in, and that's because they're absolutely knackered. They're completely exhausted. They've been harried and harried and harried, and this latest kind of absolutely raining down, this massive stonk by the British artillery is just. It's a stonk too far, having been harried so badly by the Desert Air Force. Yeah, and lots of them just start fleeing back. I remember there's a very good. I got hold of this diary. I went out when I was originally working on all this. I went out to South Africa and went out to the archives there, and I got hold of this diary by a chap called Bill Eadie, who was a sergeant, and he noted in his diary that he saw a lorry that said Gazala handicap 4-1 on vaporizing Am written alongside it. So there was still a little bit of humour going on. But it stops them in their tracks, and basically the next day Rommel urges them to keep going, and they make absolutely no progress. And by the 3rd of July, it's absolutely clear that the 90th Light are not going to get any further, and the Deutsche Afrika Korps are not going to get any further either. And the New Zealanders, actually, who are fresh to battle, completely destroyed the Arietta divisions, which is is one of only 3 armoured divisions that the Italians have. The Arietta their artillery is completely smashed on the 3rd of July. And at that point, Rommel finally calls it off. And at this stage, his divisions, which should be kind of 15,000 strong, are a tenth of that size.
And what are the officers? Who's commanding 30th Light?
The 90th Light. God,
90th Light. Sorry.
God, I just can't remember.
Because
I can't remember.
What's their feedback? Are they saying, "Look, I understand your desire to press on, and in fact, this is tangential to slightly tangential to what we're talking about, but David Stahl's new book suggests that an awful lot what's driving German generals at this point of the war is fame, medals,
yes."
And money celebrity that you get from those things, and that the way to do that is to fight particularly aggressively, because that's how you make your reputation and your formation's reputation, and your men are into that idea. I mean, Rommel, that's partly what's motivating Rommel, isn't it? Fame is the spur, and is the chap in charge of 90th Light saying, by the way, we're done here, and your orders are all very well, but we've got to stop. I mean, that strikes me as an interesting sort of point about the way the Germans fight. And it's a recurring problem, isn't it? At which point reality enters into the sort of decision-making loop. Because as we said earlier on, the thing to do is stop at Tobruk, lick your wounds, reorganise, take advantage of the fact you've got a big port, logistically reorganise, take some shipping on, get some heavier kit in, all that, refit, and then push on. But he can't do it. Reality doesn't enter Rommel's thinking.
The commander is Ulrich Kleemann.
Right, okay.
And then it's Ramke. He's very famous.
Oh, right. Okay. Yes. Yeah.
And later on, it's Ernst Gunther Bader,
Right.
our old friend.
Ah. Right.
Gerhard
Okay.
von Schwerin.
Right.
But yeah,
Okay.
no, I've never heard of Ulrich Kleeman. I have to say, I'm ashamed to
Yeah.
admit. But
Yeah.
but yeah, that's who it is.
But that's interesting because by the time a division's essentially been run into the ground, who's his duty to? At this stage of the battle. Anyway, just a question I wanted to raise. So these are the German attacks. What are the British and the Duke counterattacks? The Orc decides that what he needs to do is counterattack. And I think what's interesting about this battle.
Well, hold on, because there's some interesting. I think it's worth kind of pointing out that they just by the end of this they are so spent. By the end of play on the 3rd of July, the Afrika Korps, which is 21st Panzer, 15 Panzer, and 164th Light, they've got 37 Panzers left. That's it.
You see, if they knew that,
and he's writing home to Lucy. We all have his letters. And he writes home to Lucy, his wife, and he goes, Things are not going as I should like them. Resistance is too great, and our strength is exhausted. However, I still hope to find a way to achieve her goal. But I'm rather tired and fagged out. So if he's fagged out, and on that day, I know we keep going on about the air power, but I think it's really important because it doesn't get the credit it deserves in the narrative of this.
Yeah.
On that day, the 3rd of July, the DAF flies almost 1,000 sorties. The Luftwaffe flies 203.
Well, there.
And okay, get this from a German soldier. The enemy air force is bothering us a lot. From 5 until 11 o'clock, it was over us more than 5 or 6 times. The least of the bombing we had. Night and day, it seems to go on without interruption, and there's not a moment's peace. We're becoming like potatoes. Kartoffeln. Always underground. And if you're underground, you can't go forward. You just can't.
Yeah. Well, and also you're tired. Your nerves are shot. All that, all that sort of stuff. I mean,
all that stuff.
It is interesting though, isn't it? Because Rommel has only got this way of doing things. He's offering himself up to the Allied air forces, isn't he? It's peculiar because he must know that. He must know that.
No, but don't forget this. The Desert Air Force, the transformation of the Desert Air Force is something that's new. This has only been going on. They've been training in the lull. It's only since the 26th of May that.
Well, I know, but he's had
he's had 6 weeks.
6 weeks of this treatment. You'd think. Maybe he's thinking they can't carry on forever with this, and maybe and possibly the Luftwaffe are saying, "Oh, we shot them all down yesterday. Don't worry." There's always that. Isn't there?
But my point is that the Germans, all their years of success have come where they haven't had to worry about air power.
Yeah.
In 1940, they brush aside the Armée de l'Air, the French Air Force, RAF, all the rest of it in France. They do the same with the Polish in Poland, and across, when they're sweeping down into the Balkans, what air power? It just doesn't exist. Then they hammer, Malta. They're just, everything. They're top dogs. And they've hammered the Soviet Union, the Red Army Air Force. So they're used to this. This is the first time ever where they've played underdog. Apart from the Battle of Britain, of course. But in ground operations.
Yeah.
So this is something that's completely new. This is, and this is the argument by the time they get to 1944 in Normandy. This is why he's got this. Rommel's having this argument with von Stauffenberg, because von Stauffenberg's only been an Eastern Front man. He's never experienced it, and Rommel's going, "You have no idea what it's like being under attack all the time by the RAF and by the Allied air forces." But Rommel has, and it starts at the very end of May on his Gazala attack, which is a great victory for him, unquestionably. But the reason it ends in failure is because they're absolutely hammered all the way from Tobruk to the Alamein line by the RAF. And suddenly this is a massive wake-up call. And Rommel, at this point, has no answer because the Luftwaffe is not well prepared and organised in the same way that the RAF is.
Yeah.
He doesn't have that relationship. They don't have that doctrine where, he comes up with targets and the Luftwaffe decide. It's all kind of, it's a mishmash and no one's really thought that through. And that's because they haven't needed to.
Well, but it's all really interesting, isn't it? Because it's the example of the Luftwaffe working with the army, the Heer, in 1940 that scares the bejesus out of the Allies and makes them think, well, we're going to have to our tactical end of how we do tactical air power, isn't it?
Well, it is, except that it is the arrival of Tedder and then subsequently Conningham, who are saying to the ground commanders,
yeah,
we've worked out how we need to do this,
yes,
and this is what we need to do, and you need to like it.
But it's the Germans, having invented this thing, seem to not expect the Allies to have gone, actually, maybe we could learn from that. Maybe we should emulate that.
No. And actually then leapfrog and take it forward another notch.
Perfecting it. And this is a thing that actually happens again and again throughout the war in terms of reacting to doctrine, adopting it, holding it up, looking at it, going, actually, no, there's a different way. Or what they think. I mean, after all, a big byproduct of 1940 is what the British and the Americans think the Germans were up to, but they don't know. They don't know for sure how everything was done in 1940. It's some of it's a mystery. All they know is they've been knocked over by what looked like dominant air power and tanks. Now, we're going to take a very quick break, and then I'm going to ask a question before we move on to what follows this First Battle of Alamein. We'll see you in a second. Welcome back to We Have Ways of Making You Talk, Alamein Week. We need a fanfare or something, Jim. Or we should ring church bells, shouldn't we? That should be
well, maybe in the last one.
The last one. So, First Battle of Alamein.
We should end with that, shouldn't we?
We should end with church bells ringing. Let's sort
that out.
The great people at Goalhanger to fix that. This battle is generally. I'm going to ask you an on the nose question. This battle's presented, Jim, as a stalemate. If you most accounts you read of it, it's presented as a stalemate. I would say it's a victory for the Allies, actually, because it's one of those battles where if the Germans don't win it, that's it. They're done for, in effect. So I would argue this is not a stalemate. This is actually an Allied victory. What would you say to that outrageous proposition, Jim?
Do
you see what I'm driving at?
I see exactly what you're driving at.
For a very long time, people presented the Battle of Britain as a stalemate, didn't they? That, yes. In the end, all that really happened was the RAF had to not lose. And by doing that, they won. If we're actually weighing it in the scales of the scales of the Desert War, I think this is an Allied victory. I know it doesn't look much like one.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think by those definitions, I think you can't argue against it.
Because you can't afford.
It is an Allied victory, but where I'm not going to be drawn into is because of what follows. So that is just the first attack, and then what. So I would say that the first Rommel attack is an Allied victory.
Yeah.
But what then follows is repeated counterattacks.
Yeah.
4 attempts to kind of seize the initiative by the Auchinleck, and all of them fail.
Yeah.
And not even the best will in the world, best spin on this possible. Can you say that's a victory? What you can say is that is the not achieving his aim. So that's the absolute reverse of what Rommel's been trying to do.
No, you're just not zooming out and being zen enough about it, Jim. Rommel can afford nothing except total victory. A stalemate, a draw is a defeat. If you're playing Desert War poker the way Rommel does,
yes, only victory will do.
He always bets the house on everything. That's
a fair point. I can see that point.
Yeah,
I can see that point. I can see that point.
So even because the thing is, one of the things that swirls around, and we're going to get to this in a second. One of the things that swirls around Alamein, at the Second Battle of Alamein, is everything's inherited from the Orc. The Orc laid the groundwork. It's the Orc who got it actually deep down, got it all right, and then in Swan some out of towners who then claim credit for it all, and we'll get to that. But the fact is he can't make anything stick during the rest of the second battle, during the rest of the first battle, as you pointed out. He cannot make these counterattacks work. He tries and he tries and he tries, and it ain't happening.
Well, let's go through them. Go on then.
So
The first one is he's preparing on the 10th of July.
Yeah.
And his idea is to attack in the north with 30 corps.
Yeah.
And by this time, Rommel has been reinforced with the 164th Light Division, who caught up. And they're preparing to attack the New Zealanders' position at exactly the same time.
Yeah.
York gets wind of that, so he evacuates what's called the Kaponga Box. So they're still operating in boxes at this point.
Yes.
So Rommel attacks at the Kaponga Box as it was, where he thinks the New Zealanders were, and this is the Kaponga Box is a little bit south of, well, it's quite a long way south. It's
quite a long way south. Yeah.
10 miles south of the Mitiroa Ridge.
Yeah.
And they've actually, so he attacks it on the 9th and finds it completely empty. And then the guns in the north on the 10th of July open fire.
Yeah.
And so Rommel calls off the attack in the south.
Yeah.
And the Aussies, who have now arrived with the South Africans, overrun the Italian Sabrata division.
Yeah.
And only what stops complete collapse at that point is the newly arrived 164th Light division. But this is the point where Hauptmann Seebohm's 621st Radio Intercept Company is taken out.
Is it self-intercepted? Yes.
Is it self-intercepted? Yes. Yeah. And at the same time, Bonifeller's is kind of, what's the leakage has been discovered. So these are vital bits of intelligence to Rommel which are now denied him.
Yeah.
And that's basically it. The whole thing runs out of steam. So then Auchinleck goes, well, hang on a minute. We have made some progress. Let's make another attempt, and sort of swings back the battering ram again. And that's launched on the 14th of July. And this time, it's for the 5th Indian Division and the New Zealand Division to launch a silent night attack, but then with artillery support. And with the 2nd and 22nd Armoured Brigades hovering in the background to kind of, to follow up on the successes of the infantry. 2 Italian divisions are completely overrun. But in the process of doing so, the New Zealanders they bypass a leaguer of panzers and a number of German infantry positions, who are then behind them when dawn breaks. So half the New Zealand division is kind of surrounded and cut off from the rest of the New Zealand division, and 350 men are captured. And the 2nd Armoured Brigade tries to come in and help, but gets bogged down on a minefield. Then the 22nd Armoured Brigade moves up, but also gets stuck in Italian minefields. It's way too late to help the New Zealanders. Rommel, with his kind of usual elan, managed to cobble together various units from the 21st Panzer, 90th Light, what remains, plus some of 15 Panzer, just enough to create a counterattack, and emerges through the dust and smoke with the sun behind them, and catches another kind of 400 New Zealanders, including Charles Upham, VC, and Barr. And that's where he's come from. And they're eventually stopped by 22nd Armoured Brigade, but that's that one over. That's gone absolutely nowhere. That's just a classic kind of ships moving around the sea, manoeuvring around the desert. New Zealanders lose 1,400 men for literally no gain at all. So that's effectively 2 battalions out. But the New Zealanders are also getting replacements, including the 28th Maori Battalion, which is very interesting because the Maoris are all completely volunteers. They're not conscripted. And they're all, the ABCD companies are all divided into, on the lines of tribes. Which I think is quite interesting. And they fight very, very tenaciously. So since the beginning of July, the Italians have lost 4 divisions. The Afrika Korps now only has 42 again. It's been from 37, it's been reinforced by the 164th Light and a few other replacements and stuff. They've been then lost. So they've now only got 42 panzers left. Mussolini goes home on the 20th of July, realising he's not going to go into Cairo on his charger after all. Yeah, he takes his horse with him. Yeah, put on a plane.
Priorities, Jim.
Yeah. So at this point, York thinks, well, we'll just give it one more go, shall we? And so this time he plans to attack straight along the Ruwaisut Ridge, which, if you remember, is the one that is running roughly kind of east to west, kind of 10 miles south of the coast.
Yeah, the 3 o'clock.
Kind of sort of, the 3 o'clock. Exactly. Yet again, it's going to be the New Zealanders and the 5th Indian who lead the way, but with the Aussies supporting. And you have to kind of ask yourself, why? Why not lead with the Aussies? Why would the New Zealanders have been in battle and the 5th Indian for the last 2 attempts. and they've been in it in the thick of it for 3 weeks now. You'd thought they might have a break, but no. Anyways, another nighttime infantry assault, yet again supported by artillery. The plan is to kind of make gaps in the minefields, then 23rd Armour Brigade to stream through. The Aussies do get their first objectives, and the New Zealanders in the north and the New Zealand Indians push forwards, but don't get enough gaps in the minefields. Armours is struggling to get through, and eventually, with no cohesion with the infantry whatsoever, 23rd Armour Brigade manages to get through the minefield, does a balaclava charge, and gets blown to pieces. And they lose 87 tanks.
Well done, everyone.
And it's just a joke. And I remember talking to Joe Madeley, who was in the 2nd 13th Battalion, an Aussie guy. And I remember him saying that night they were then sent out to do kind of wiring. And every so often they'd hear this sort of red glow. And that would be one of 23rd Armour Brigade trying to get back and hitting a mine.
Oh, Christ.
It's all a bit rubbish, it's again, no one's learned any lessons. There's a total lack of all arms cooperation.
I mean, there's been no time to, has there? Though in the
there
sort of
hasn't,
in the torrid tumble.
But then take the time and just
yeah. Well, in a way, it's the mirror image of Rommel not stopping when he could. It's the Orc could, he could not do this if he wanted to. But then I suppose he's thinking passive defence didn't work in the Gazala line battle. It's not served us well. He's no doubt got London on the phone going, get your finger out.
Go on.
Crack on. Why will none of my generals fight?
Yeah. Yes, I'm looking at the statistics. It's telling me you've got 750,000 men.
Yeah. And you do very much. This is very much the period of the war where Churchill's saying, "What the hell's? Why can none of my generals fight?"
But it's interesting because
soldiers not fight and all that.
Yeah. So one of the armour experts who's come out from having done kind of intense training in England, he's come out as the Orcs armour expert is Dick McCreary, who later goes on to command 8th Army.
Right.
By the end of the Italian campaign, is chief of staff to Alexander.
Right.
And Dick McCreary says, you're doing this all wrong. This is how you want to do it. And it's really not a simple, it's not a difficult thing. You just need to kind of, get much closer infantry armour coordination, no more balaclava charges. They have an argument and the Orc sacks him.
Oh, God.
So anyway, so then they think, undeterred, they then have a 4%.
Not one attempt, ladies and gentlemen, not two, not three, but a fourth attempt. Yes. So, and this is stretching my proposition that actually this is an Allied victory.
Well, I kind of think so. I've got to say. So this is the 4th attempt. And the Orc orders one last push again by 30 Corps, again in the north. But this time we've just got a little bit more armour because we've got 1st Armoured Division. Yeah. And this time the plan is for the South Africans to make the gap in the ever-growing minefields. So, the job is significantly harder than it was at the beginning of the month. And this time southeast of the Mitraille Ridge, which, as you remember, is the arm of the clock pointing to 10.
Yeah.
At 1 a.m. on the 27th of July, the 24th Aussies sees the eastern end of the ridge. Then 69th Brigade of 50th Division. We come across them again, Stanley Hollis, D-Day, Gold Beach, all the rest of it.
Yeah.
They pass. The plan is that they pass through the gap created by the South Africans and gap any further minefields. And then, do you know what's going to happen? The armour's going to follow through.
If some tanks come through, yes.
And charge on a balaclava charge and win the day without any infantry whatsoever. Oh, but anyway, of course, all the problems that have always been with nighttime attacks are still there.
Yeah.
No one can see diddly squat. Whatever you could see, you can see even less because there's lots of smoke. Occasionally flares go crackle, 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 crackle. And then suddenly you're lit up like a beacon. And there's huge complications of comms, of radio connections, sticking to timetables, sticking with the artillery because there hasn't been enough all-arms training. Because when they had the opportunity to do the training in the spring, they didn't. They were so busy building boxes along the Gazala line, etc., etc., etc. So the potential for cock-up is absolutely huge. And of course, that's exactly what happens.
Well, and also because attacking's difficult. It's
difficult, yeah.
It's really, really hard. Before we get too far into, they're cocking it up the way you... This is all really, really... It's all really, really hard. You've also been at it for ages. After all, this whole phase began in...
2 months ago.
In late May. So that you're
this is launched on the 29th to the 26th, 27th of July, which is exactly a month, 2 months after the Rommel launched his attack in May.
Yeah, there's been this great, endless, ceaseless tumble of events, and sort of strange decisions that. I mean, I think a lot of the odd decisions you can attribute to the fact that this is this relentless tumble of events, and what on earth do you do?
Yeah.
And the Orc obviously thinks, well, how I won Crusader was by making sure I took it to the Africa Corps and stuck it at them and didn't give up, because after all, the wobble in the middle of Crusader, you can argue the Orcs thinking, well, this isn't irretrievable. We'll do what we did last time.
Absolutely. I mean, that is exactly what is happening. I'm absolutely sure of it. But do you want to know what happens on the fourth attempt?
Well, of course we do.
Well, the Aussies, they do capture their objectives.
Brilliant.
But they capture their objectives on the eastern end of the Mitiara Ridge at 3 a.m., not 1:30. And just two Aussie battalions, so what's that, 1,400 men, are clear by 8 o'clock the following morning, but by which point it's suddenly dawn, bright daylight. The armour is lagging behind because guess what? They're stuck in the minefields.
Yeah. And
by the evening, the infantry that's supposed to pass through from 69th Brigade is supposed to pass through the South Africans, the 6th DLI, Stanley Hollis, 5th East Yorks, and the 2nd and 28th Aussies, they're all overrun because they've suddenly got out and they've managed to pass through. They're suddenly exposed. The Axis force has counterattacked. Yeah. And at the end of the day, on the 27th, they've lost 1,000 men.
Germans are doing
zero material gain at all.
Yeah. Germans are doing what they do, which is counterattack.
And
what hasn't happened yet, which is what happens later in the war, is that you expect them to counterattack, so you've got your artillery laid in so that when they do, you catch them in the open and you do for them. You haven't yet developed that idea that the reason you're attacking is to draw the Germans into a counterattack so you can destroy them, which is a thing that 2 years later is absolutely 100% slick in these same in these same formations. When they come to Normandy. I mean, it's very. I'm still gonna say, if it's a stalemate, right? It's staler for the Germans. Let's put it that way. Can we put it that way?
Yeah, I think you can put it that way. But I think what is absolutely clear is that the Orc has run out of ideas.
Yeah.
He's PCA always tries to kind of make out that it was his plan and that Monty just basically adopted it and all this kind of stuff, and it was his decision to go to the Alamein line. All of which is true, but it doesn't take a military genius to realise that the Alamein line is the place to be, because it's literally the only place in the entire Western Desert between there and Tripoli where you can have a line that's got an end, because that's where the Qatar division, and also it makes perfect sense that you shorten your supply lines.
Well, and also, the York didn't exactly choose it. I mean, the circumstances have delivered him there, haven't they?
They have.
His previous choice, which is the Gazala line, and not to properly defend Tobruk, that's the choice he makes after Crusader, and it's a bad one. I don't think you can. Circumstances have selected El Alamein for this as much as anything else, haven't they?
Yes.
You'd sooner not be that close to Alex, because it's put the wind up everybody, if nothing else. Certainly put the wind up Westminster. And it's finally, you get the chiefs of the Imperial General Staff are like, right, okay, this isn't working. You aren't working out.
Don't forget also that Churchill's had this huge humiliation. He's of all, he's been in Washington when Tobruk falls. He's got massive kind of red face for that.
Yeah.
Then he's faced a vote of no confidence in Parliament.
Yeah.
Which is taken on the 25th of June, so 4 days later. And obviously, he's escaped by an overwhelming. Only 25 people vote against it out of, and 475 or whatever it is.
That it happened at all, Jim.
But the fact that it happens at all. Then there's huge debates where Oliver Middleton, who is the Minister for Supply, has to defend the record about standard of kit. And that's where he stands up and goes, actually, we do have an anti-tank gun comparable to the 88mm. It's called the 3.7 inch, and there's hundreds of them in the canal zone. And you know, it's not my fault if the army commanders aren't using them.
Decide not to use them,
Yeah. So, you know, but all that is happening in the, you know, so there's a lot of anger. So that reflects, you know, Churchill would understand that reflects badly on him. And anyway, he's a fighting prime minister, and you know, he wants us to do well. And you know, there's now plans for Torch, you know, and a joint Anglo-US assault in Northwest Africa. You know, they need to get a grip of this situation. And so Brooke is also starting to worry about Auchinleck and goes, okay, I need to go over and see it for myself. And then Churchill goes, well, I'm coming with you. And Brooke tries to put him off, but he's not to be deterred. And so off they go together. By the time he gets out there, there's at the beginning of August, there's this pause going on in the fighting, but the bad vibes are really there. Moorehead is in a grump with
there's
the Aussie.
Proper bad vibes from these Duke Dominion's officers, isn't there?
Yeah.
Because after all, they've also got their governments on the phone going, what the bloody hell's going on?
Yeah.
Why is it always you? Why, you know, that's what Moorehead will have been dealing with. Why is it always you? Why are you having to do all the fighting?
Yeah, and Moorehead is a pretty good general, actually.
Well, that also turns into politically, the British are spending our lives, not their own, to prosecute this battle, which is very, very tricky politically. You know, the Australians are becoming semi-detached imperially anyway, aren't they?
Yeah.
So the thing is that the British political context is what you know, as you've laid out, but there's also each of those generals are occupying similar roles to, you know, Auchinleck. They've got their governments on the phone.
Absolutely. Moorehead is good. Moorehead is competent.
Yeah.
And when Norrie, who is a 30 Corps commander, gets sacked, and not before time, I mean, he's useless.
Yeah.
Auchinleck gets Ramsden to come in, not to be confused with the Fish King, obviously.
Yeah.
And gets and Moorehead thinks, well, why haven't I been promoted? Why aren't I the Corps commander? And actually, he's got a point, frankly.
Yeah.
Both Pienaar and who was the South African commander, Kippenberger, who's taken over from Freiburg because Freiburg's wounded, are irritated that the way they're being used and kind of overused.
Yeah. Well, and you've got a really febrile situation about who's going to fight in South Africa for the South African army anyway. You know, there's all that backstory that
all that going on.
You know, it's only volunteers who've gone. So there's he's dealing with, you know, the temperature within those countries as well is really feeling, because after all, we started off this series of podcasts by saying, you know, one of the things about the war in the Northwestern Desert is it's you know, it sits in the centre of the British Empire, this war, if anywhere.
Yes.
It's also a British strategy way of doing things, where you draw resources and men from all over the world, and you get the enemy to turn up to fight you at your convenience, somewhere that's difficult for them to fight you. You know, and it's sort of, Egypt is kind of the imperial centre of gravity of the British Empire, with the Suez Canal in it, blah, 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 right? But that then also means you've got the issue of dealing with those governments, Dominion governments now. You've got what that baggage brings politically, that then feeds into your ability to enact strategy, that then feeds into your ability to fight and to run an army harmoniously. And, you know, we look later in the war again, you know, Alex is really brilliant at this in Italy. He's really brilliant at getting everyone to sort of chime along together. And Eisenhower's, you know, Eisenhower is the ultimate diplomat soldier, doing exactly the same thing. But here, that's all fallen apart.
Yeah, and ultimately that has to fall at the Orc's feet.
Yes,
I mean, you know, he's
completely
the commander in chief.
There's nowhere else for that buck to stop.
There isn't. Yeah. So anyway, so Churchill and Brooke come out, and Churchill goes up into the desert and goes to 8th Army headquarters, and he's not impressed by what he sees at just at the tactical headquarters. It's a bit of a mess. Yeah. There's sort of crap everywhere. There's lots of flies. It feels unhealthy. He talks to Major General Chink Dorman Smith, who's a very, very Marmite character anyway, who is Auchinleck's main chief of staff as Commander-in-Chief Middle East. Really loses it. Churchill really loses his temper on him and says, you've got 750,000 men. Why the hell aren't you doing, why can't you do better?
Although all that does speak to Churchill not quite understanding.
Of course. But he's in a massive grump. And after that, he gives his description of him going out of the tent and standing alone and glowering at the desert until Strafford Gott turns up.
Yeah.
And he has a sort of 5-minute conversation with Gott and then decides that he should be the new 8th Army commander and that the Orc has to be sacked. And his mood is only improved when he goes to Mary Cunningham's headquarters, which is miles away.
Yeah.
And Cunningham does say, it's annoying because, we keep saying we should be together, should have a joint headquarters, and we don't get it. So there's this disconnect between what we're doing and 8th Army.
Which is absolutely extraordinary. Every time, I read about this.
Someone defends the Orc.
You come to this, that one of the great innovations is, that comes after this is to put the two tents next to each other. I think that's an innovation. That's like,
and also,
do you know what I mean, Jim? It's like, what the hell were you thinking before this? It's quite extraordinary, and it
is quite extraordinary.
And it comes up as one of those things which is sort of like, hey, and you won't believe what they do to figure this out. They put the two tents next to each other. You absolute morons.
And
it's
and that falls at Orc's feet as well because Cunningham and Tedder have been urging it for ages. And they just don't. They're just not interested. But when Churchill goes there, he has a cracking time because they're all full of, Cunningham and Elmhurst are exactly the kind of pair of people that he wants to see. Competent, apsionic, full of confidence, charismatic, saying all the right things, reporting lots of successes. And they have a massive knees up and it's all great. When they eventually get back to Cairo, they kind of decide to thrash it all out on the 6th of August in Cairo at GHQ. And they decide to split up the command. They decide that the Middle East command is too big.
And that is a crucial decision because you could argue the reason Auchinleck's eye isn't quite on the ball is because he's got loads of balls to keep his eye on, so to speak. So you could argue that's
you could, but
don't overdo it.
Don't overdo it because the bottom line is that Orc always says, I always had my eye, I had to look behind my back the whole time about what was going on in Iraq and what was going on in Syria. But actually, nothing's going on in Iraq and nothing's going on in Syria. It's all, those troubled days are over pretty much.
Yeah.
And that's where you delegate. You delegate someone to deal with that.
Yeah.
You send someone out there and they're in charge. And if there's any kind of flare up, then you get in touch. Otherwise, don't bother me with that.
Yeah.
And he doesn't. So anyway, so again, I'm sympathetic about the scale of the command he has, but I don't think that's a reason why he's not on it in the Western Desert and in
I'd agree.
1942.
I'd agree with you. I'll tell you what we're going to do, Jim, because we're reaching a point where we've been talking a while on this. We're reaching a point where we should probably stop.
Do you think?
Yeah, but what we'll do is so Gott gets the job.
Well, Gott gets the job. Auchinleck is sacked.
Yeah.
They split up the two commands, so that it's now Near East Command, which is Syria, Palestine, Iraq, and Iran.
And that's the
Middle
6th
East
of
Command,
August.
which is Egypt. Yep, Egypt, and rubber stamped by the War Cabinet on the 7th of August.
Yeah.
And General Alexander, my great hero, is made Commander-in-Chief of the Middle East instead. They offer the Orc the Near East Command, but he turns it down. It's too humiliating for him. And on the 7th, the same day that Gott gets appointed commander of the 8th Army, he is late getting picked up. His transport comes in to pick him up. He's late arriving to the plane. There's a whole load of wounded people on it. And as they're flying back to Cairo, they're picked up by a swarm of 6 Messerschmitts, and he is assassinated.
He's shot down. He's killed.
He's shot down, and it is a deliberate assassination. There's absolutely no question.
So
19 of the 23 killed.
So your hero is on the scene, and then I wouldn't call him my hero, but a man I find relentlessly beguiling, fascinating, and
gets pulled in.
It gets pulled in. That's right. It's Monty time, everybody. We will see you for our next episode in our Alamein week. He's here, finally. I have turned up upon the battlefield to make my date with destiny. I'm going to do. We're going to get Monty impressions from now on. But
yeah. What do you? Well,
so we will.
Thanks to the first one.
We will see you for our next episode of Alamein Week. May the church bells ring.
Alamein Week.
Alamein Week.
Ring the bells, build the bells. Victory.
Wing the bells for victory.
Wing the bells.
We will see you next time. Thanks very much for listening. Bye bye.
Cheerio.